The morning sun cast long shadows across First National Bank of Riverside, as Maya Chen adjusted her maternity shirt for the third time, trying to find a position that didn't make her feel like she was carrying a bowling ball. At 8 months pregnant, even the simplest tasks had become exercises in logistics and determination. The baby kicked against her ribs as she approached the bank's glass doors, reminding her that she wasn't just taking care of herself anymore. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Maya paused at the entrance, one hand instinctively moving to her rounded belly, while the other clutched a manila folder containing documents she'd been dreading to deal with. Inside were the final custody papers from her divorce, financial statements for the house sale, and the loan application that would determine whether she could afford the small apartment she'd found across town. Starting over at 34 while pregnant wasn't exactly the life plan she'd imagined, but sometimes life had other ideas. The bank's interior was typical of small-town financial institutions, all beige walls and motivational posters about saving for the future. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in that particular shade of institutional brightness that made everyone look slightly unwell. Maya took her place in line behind an elderly man counting crumpled bills and a woman in a business suit tapping impatiently on her phone. Maya's back ached from standing and she shifted her weight from one foot to the other, trying to ease the constant pressure that had become her companion over the past month. The baby seemed to have found her bladder particularly interesting today, and she wondered if she'd have time to use the restroom after handling her banking business. Such were the glamorous concerns of late pregnancy. The woman ahead of her in line turned slightly, taking in Maya's obvious condition with the kind of look that pregnant women knew well. A mixture of sympathy and judgment, as if being pregnant in public was somehow both miraculous and slightly inconvenient for everyone else. Maya had grown used to the stares, the unsolicited advice, the way people seemed to think her belly was public property worthy of commentary. She checked her watch and sighed. The appointment with her new landlord was in 45 minutes, and she still needed to stop by the post office to forward her mail. The divorce had left her with a seemingly endless list of administrative tasks, each one a reminder that the life she'd built over the past decade was being systematically dismantled and rebuilt from scratch. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from her sister Sarah. "How are you holding up? Need me to come with you to the apartment showing?" Maya typed back quickly. "I'm fine. Just finishing up at the bank. See you tonight?" She appreciated Sarah's concern, but there was something important about handling these final steps herself. After months of feeling helpless and overwhelmed, she needed to prove to herself that she could navigate this transition independently. The line moved forward, and Maya found herself studying the other customers. The elderly man ahead of her was having trouble with his deposit slip, squinting at the small print and asking the teller to repeat instructions. The businesswoman had moved to a different line, apparently deciding efficiency was more important than maintaining her original position. A young couple near the commercial banking section was discussing a small business loan, their voices carrying the nervous excitement of people chasing a dream. Maya's condition made her hyper-aware of her surroundings in ways she'd never experienced before. Pregnancy had heightened her senses and sharpened her attention to potential dangers. She noticed the security camera positions, the exits, the way the teller windows were arranged. It wasn't paranoia, exactly, just the heightened awareness that came with knowing she was responsible for 2 lives instead of 1. The bank's background noise was typical of weekday morning business. Quiet conversations between customers and tellers, the mechanical sounds of cash counting machines, the soft ding of computer notifications. Maya found the routine sounds oddly comforting. There was something reassuring about the mundane normalcy of people conducting their financial business, paying bills, making deposits, planning for their futures. She glanced around at the bank's decor, noting the local community photos on the walls. Pictures of high school graduation ceremonies, little league teams, ribbon cuttings for new businesses. Riverside was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, where major news traveled through the coffee shop faster than social media, where people still waved at strangers on the street. It wasn't where Maya had planned to raise her child, but circumstances had made the decision for her. The divorce settlement had been fair but not generous. Her ex-husband kept the house they'd bought together, while Maya received enough cash to start over somewhere less expensive. Riverside fit the budget and offered the kind of quiet, safe environment she wanted for her child. The downside was being 2 hours away from Sarah and the rest of her support network. But independence had its own value. Maya's pregnancy had been the final breaking point in a marriage that had been struggling for years. Not because her husband didn't want children, but because the pregnancy had forced them both to confront how little they actually knew about each other's dreams for the future. They'd been playing house without ever seriously discussing what kind of home they wanted to build. The divorce had been amicable but heartbreaking, the end of a relationship that had simply run its course. Now, standing in line at a small-town bank with her entire future folded into a manila envelope, Maya felt the weight of starting over. The baby kicked again, and she smiled despite her nervousness. At least she wasn't starting over alone. In 4 weeks, give or take, she'd have a daughter to focus on, someone who would need her to be strong, capable, and present. The elderly man ahead of her finished his transaction and shuffled toward the exit, leaving Maya next in line. She approached the teller window with the careful walk that had become second nature, one hand supporting her lower back. The teller, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair, smiled warmly as Maya approached. "Good morning. How can I help you today?" The teller's name tag read, Dorothy, and her voice carried the patient friendliness of someone who genuinely enjoyed helping people with their banking needs. Maya placed her folder on the counter and began explaining her situation. She needed to close her joint account, open a new individual account, and arrange for the transfer of funds from the house sale. It was complicated enough under normal circumstances, but pregnancy brain had made even simple tasks feel overwhelming lately. Dorothy listened carefully, asking clarifying questions and making notes on her computer. "Congratulations on the baby," Dorothy said while pulling up account information. "Do you know what you're having?" "A girl," Maya replied, unconsciously placing her hand on her belly. "Due in about a month. How exciting. Do you have a name picked out?" "Isabella. Isabella Rose." Maya smiled as she said it. Choosing the name had been one of the few decisions in recent months that had felt entirely positive. Entirely hers to make. Dorothy continued processing the account changes, occasionally asking Maya to sign forms or provide additional identification. The process was taking longer than Maya had hoped, but Dorothy's efficiency and warmth made the wait bearable. They chatted about the upcoming birth, the challenges of moving while pregnant, and Dorothy's own memories of raising children in Riverside. "It's a wonderful place to raise kids," Dorothy assured her. "Safe neighborhoods, good schools, and everyone looks out for each other. You'll find your community here." Maya appreciated the reassurance. Moving to a new town while pregnant and newly divorced felt like jumping off a cliff and hoping for a soft landing. But Riverside had already shown her small kindnesses, neighbors who'd waved when she'd looked at apartments, shop owners who'd smiled and offered congratulations when they noticed her condition, a general sense of welcomeness that felt genuine rather than performative. The bank's atmosphere remained calm and routine as Dorothy worked through Maya's paperwork. Other customers came and went, conducting their own financial business with the quiet efficiency of a small-town institution that knew its community well. Maya checked her watch again and calculated that she'd still have enough time to make her other appointments if Dorothy could finish the account setup within the next 10 minutes. "Almost done," Dorothy said, as if reading Maya's thoughts. "Just need to print out your new account information and temporary checks." Maya nodded and used the brief wait to stretch her back as much as possible while standing at the counter. The baby had found a comfortable position that unfortunately involved pressing against Maya's sciatic nerve, sending occasional shooting pains down her left leg. She shifted her weight and tried to find a position that provided some relief. The morning sun had moved higher, streaming through the bank's large front windows and warming the interior despite the air conditioning. Maya could see the main street through the glass, watching people go about their Thursday morning routines. A postal worker making deliveries, shop owners setting up sidewalk displays, mothers pushing strollers toward the small park at the end of the block. It struck Maya that in a few months, she'd be one of those mothers, navigating Riverside sidewalks with Isabella in a stroller, becoming part of the community rhythm she was currently observing from the outside. The thought was both exciting and terrifying. She'd spent the past decade building a life in the suburbs outside Denver, only to have it all change when the marriage ended. Now she was starting over in a place where she knew no one, with a baby coming and a rapidly dwindling savings account. But there was something liberating about the fresh start, too. No shared history to navigate. no mutual friends choosing sides, no familiar places loaded with memories of her former life. Riverside offered the possibility of defining herself entirely on her own terms, of building a life that reflected who she was now rather than who she'd been as part of a couple. Dorothy finished printing the documents and organized them into a neat stack. "Here we are," she said, sliding the papers across the counter. "Your new account is all set up, and the funds transfer should be complete by tomorrow afternoon. Is there anything else I can help you with today?" Maya reviewed the documents quickly, making sure all the information was correct. Everything looked good, and she felt a small surge of accomplishment at having completed another step in her transition process. "I think that covers everything. Thank you so much for your help, Dorothy. You've made this much easier than I expected." "My pleasure, dear. Welcome to Riverside. I hope you and Isabella will be very happy here." Maya gathered her papers and prepared to leave, already mentally moving on to her next appointment. The apartment viewing was scheduled for 11:30, followed by lunch with the landlord to finalize the lease agreement. After that, she planned to drive around town a bit more, getting familiar with the layout and identifying important locations like the hospital, pediatrician offices, and grocery stores. As she turned toward the exit, Maya's attention was caught by a commotion near the bank's entrance. 3 men had entered together, moving with the kind of purposeful coordination that immediately set off alarm bells in her mind. They weren't dressed like typical bank customers, and something about their body language suggested they weren't there for routine banking business. The first man through the door was tall and lean, wearing dark jeans and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. The second was shorter but broader, with the kind of muscular build that suggested either manual labor or serious gym time. The third man lingered near the entrance, his eyes scanning the interior with the systematic attention of someone cataloging exits and potential obstacles. Maya's pregnancy had heightened her instincts for danger, a protective mechanism that had emerged as her body prepared to safeguard not just herself but her unborn child. Something about these 3 men triggered every warning signal her nervous system could produce. Their movements were too coordinated, their attention too focused, their presence too intrusive for normal banking business. She was still standing near Dorothy's window when the tall man reached into his jacket and withdrew something that made Maya's blood freeze. The metallic glint of a handgun caught the fluorescent light, and suddenly the ordinary morning transformed into something else entirely. The casual conversations around the bank died, as other customers noticed what was happening. "Everyone on the ground now," the tall man shouted, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed immediately. "This is a robbery. Nobody moves. Nobody gets hurt." The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence that followed. Maya felt her heart rate spike as adrenaline flooded her system, her body's natural response to immediate danger. But instead of the fight-or-flight reaction she might have experienced before pregnancy, her mind immediately focused on a single priority: protecting Isabella. Dorothy's face had gone pale behind the teller window, her hands frozen over her keyboard as she processed what was happening. Around the bank, other customers were beginning to react with varying degrees of shock, fear, and confusion. The elderly man Maya had seen earlier was still near the door, looking bewildered and fragile. The young couple discussing business loans had instinctively moved closer together, as if proximity could provide protection. Maya's training kicked in before her conscious mind had fully processed the situation. Years earlier, before marriage and pregnancy had redirected her life path, she'd served as a military police officer specializing in crisis response and tactical operations. The skills she'd developed during that time had been dormant for nearly a decade, buried under civilian life and professional routines that had nothing to do with firearms or emergency situations. But muscle memory was a powerful thing, and Maya's body began responding to the threat with the automatic reactions that had once been second nature. Her breathing steadied, her vision sharpened, and her mind started calculating distances, angles, and tactical options, even as her hands moved protectively to her belly. The second robber, the muscular one, was positioning himself near the commercial banking area, his weapon drawn but pointed at the floor. His job seemed to be crowd control, making sure customers and bank employees stayed where they could be easily monitored. The third man remained near the entrance, presumably watching for approaching police or unexpected arrivals. "I said everyone on the ground," the tall man repeated, his voice gaining an edge of impatience. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Maya slowly lowered herself toward the floor, using the teller counter for support as her pregnant body made the movement awkward and difficult. Her mind was racing through tactical assessments, but her physical condition created complications she'd never had to consider before. 8 months pregnant was not optimal for any kind of physical confrontation, yet she found herself in exactly the situation where her old training might be most needed. Dorothy had raised her hands and was slowly backing away from her window, her face showing the kind of professional training that bank employees received for exactly this scenario. Don't resist, don't argue, don't try to be a hero. Give them what they want and hope they leave quickly without anyone getting hurt. The tall robber approached the teller windows, his weapon now pointed directly at Dorothy. Open the drawers, all of them, and don't even think about hitting any alarm buttons. Maya watched the scene unfold from her position on the floor, her military training automatically cataloging details that might be useful later. The robbers' movements, their communication patterns, their apparent level of experience with this type of crime. They seemed organized but not professional, dangerous but not necessarily expert. "You too, lady," the muscular robber said, noticing that Maya was having difficulty getting down to the floor. "I don't care if you're pregnant. Get down like everyone else." There was something in his tone that went beyond the necessary intimidation of a robbery, a casual cruelty that suggested he enjoyed having power over people he perceived as vulnerable. Maya finished lowering herself to the floor, but something in her posture remained alert, coiled, ready. "Look at this," the robber near the entrance called out, his voice carrying amusement rather than concern. "We got ourselves a pregnant lady here. What's the matter, honey? Baby daddy not around to protect you?" The comment was clearly intended to humiliate and demoralize, the kind of psychological intimidation that some criminals use to maintain control over their victims. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. But it had an unintended effect on Maya. Instead of feeling more vulnerable, she felt something cold and focused settling into place behind her eyes. "Maybe we should make her crawl around a bit," the muscular one suggested, his voice carrying the tone of someone testing boundaries. "You know, since she's already down there anyway." The tall robber was focused on Dorothy in the cash drawers, but his companions seemed to be entertaining themselves with Maya's obvious vulnerability. To them, she represented the perfect victim, heavily pregnant, alone, physically compromised, and unable to pose any threat to their operation. "Please," Maya said quietly, her voice carrying just the right note of fear and submission. "I'm just here to close my account. I don't want any trouble." The performance was carefully calculated. By appearing weak and frightened, she was encouraging them to dismiss her as a threat, while simultaneously gathering information about their personalities, their decision-making processes, and their attention to detail. The tall one was focused and businesslike. The other two were getting distracted by the opportunity to exercise power over someone they perceived as helpless. "Close your account?" The one near the entrance laughed. "Well, I guess we're all closing accounts today, honey. Bank's going out of business after we're done here." Maya noted that he was speaking loudly enough for other customers to hear, which suggested either inexperience or a desire to increase the fear and chaos in the room. Professional criminals typically worked quickly and quietly, minimizing unnecessary interaction that could later be used to identify them. Dorothy had opened her cash drawer and was removing bills with trembling hands. The tall robber watched her carefully, occasionally giving directions about which denominations to prioritize. His approach was methodical and efficient, suggesting this wasn't his first robbery. "Faster," he told Dorothy. "We don't have all day." Maya could see a bead of sweat forming on Dorothy's forehead despite the air conditioning. The older woman was clearly terrified, but doing her best to comply with the robber's demands. Around the bank, other customers remained on the floor in various states of shock and fear. The elderly man looked particularly frail and disoriented, while the young couple clung to each other with the desperate intensity of people who'd suddenly realized how fragile their normal world really was. The muscular robber was becoming increasingly focused on Maya, apparently finding her pregnancy an irresistible target for his psychological games. "What are you going to tell your kid about this day, Mama? You going to tell her how Mommy got robbed and didn't do anything about it?" He was clearly enjoying the cruelty of the comment, but he'd made a crucial error. By referring to the baby as her, he'd revealed that he'd been listening to Maya's conversation with Dorothy about expecting a daughter. This suggested he'd been in the bank longer than she'd initially realized, possibly conducting surveillance before initiating the robbery. "I'm just going to tell her that Mommy stayed safe," Maya replied, maintaining her submissive tone while filing away this new information. "Stayed safe," the robber repeated mockingly. "Yeah, that's what you're good at, isn't it? Staying safe, staying on the ground where you belong." Maya's hands remained protectively positioned over her belly, but her fingers had begun what looked like nervous fidgeting. In reality, she was testing her reach and mobility, determining what movements were possible given her current position and physical condition. The baby was positioned in a way that made her somewhat front-heavy, but her center of gravity was still manageable if she needed to move quickly. The tall robber had finished with Dorothy's drawer and was moving to the next teller window, methodically cleaning out each cash position. His companions were supposed to be watching the customers and maintaining security, but they were becoming increasingly distracted by their power trip with Maya. "Maybe we should take her with us," the one near the entrance suggested. "You know, insurance policy. Cops won't shoot at a pregnant lady." The suggestion sent a chill through the bank. Taking hostages transformed a robbery into something much more dangerous, both for the criminals and for everyone else in the building. Maya's mind immediately began calculating how to prevent that scenario from developing. "Nah," the muscular one replied. "Too much trouble. Besides, look at her. She can barely get around. She'd just slow us down." Maya felt a flash of irritation at the casual dismissal of her physical capabilities, even though their underestimation was exactly what she needed. Let them think she was helpless. Let them believe pregnancy had rendered her completely incapable of any meaningful action. Their assumptions were becoming her tactical advantage. The tall robber had moved to the third teller window and was growing impatient with the slower pace of cash removal. "Come on," he called to his companions. "Stop playing around and keep your eyes on the exits." But his partners were too invested in their psychological torment of Maya to refocus on security protocols. The muscular one had moved closer, positioning himself where he could look down at her with obvious satisfaction. "You know what I think?" he said, his voice carrying the tone of someone who'd found a new source of entertainment. "I think we should make her crawl over to the door on her hands and knees. Show everyone what happens when you can't protect yourself." The suggestion was cruel enough to draw shocked reactions from other customers, but it also revealed how completely the robbers had dismissed Maya as any kind of threat. They saw her pregnancy as total incapacitation, her position on the floor as complete submission. Maya looked up at him with what appeared to be growing fear. "Please don't make me do that. It's hard for me to move around like this." "That's the point, honey. Life's hard. Today's going to be a lesson about how hard it can get." The robber was clearly enjoying himself, but he'd made another crucial error. He'd positioned himself close enough to Maya that his weapon was within her reach if she could create the right opportunity. More importantly, his attention was now completely focused on humiliating her rather than monitoring the tactical situation. Maya's breathing had remained steady throughout the encounter, a skill she'd learned during military training for managing stress and maintaining focus under pressure. But now, she deliberately allowed her breathing to become more rapid and shallow, creating the appearance of growing panic. "I can't," she said, her voice taking on a note of desperation that wasn't entirely feigned. "Please, I'm 8 months pregnant. I can barely walk normally." "Then I guess you better figure it out," the robber replied, "because you're going to crawl whether you think you can or not." The tall robber called out from across the bank, "Just leave her alone and watch the door. We're almost done here." But the muscular robber was too invested in his power trip to listen to practical advice. "Relax. I got this under control. Don't I, Mama?" He leaned down slightly, bringing his face closer to Maya's level. It was meant as another intimidation tactic, but it also brought him into the range where Maya's years of hand-to-hand combat training could become relevant, despite her current physical limitations. "You're gonna crawl over to that door," he continued, "and then you're gonna thank us for the lesson about staying in your place." Maya looked around the bank as if seeking help that wasn't coming, but she was actually conducting a final tactical assessment. The positions of the other robbers, the locations of the other customers, the angles and distances involved in what she was beginning to plan. The elderly man was still near the entrance, looking fragile and confused. The young couple remained huddled together near the commercial banking area. Dorothy and the other bank employees were behind their windows, frozen in various stages of compliance with the robbers' demands. Everyone was exactly where Maya needed them to be. "I don't think I can," Maya said, her voice now carrying what sounded like genuine tears. "Please, I'm just trying to start a new life here. I don't want any trouble." "Well, you got trouble anyway," the robber replied. "And it's about to get worse if you don't start moving." Maya's hands moved to the floor as if preparing to attempt the humiliating crawl he'd demanded. But instead of pushing herself forward, she was setting herself up for something the robbers couldn't possibly have anticipated. Because what they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that the pregnant woman they were tormenting had once been Staff Sergeant Maya Chen, military police specialist in crisis response and tactical operations. They didn't know that she'd served 3 tours in active combat zones, that she'd been trained in close-quarters combat by some of the best instructors in the military. They didn't know that pregnancy hadn't eliminated her capabilities, it had simply required her to adapt them. And they were about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone assumes is helpless. Maya's fingers found the exact position she needed on the floor, her weight distribution calculated for maximum efficiency despite her altered center of gravity. The muscular robber was still leaning over her, his weapon held casually rather than defensively, his attention focused on her face rather than her hands. "Time to crawl, Mama," he said, his voice thick with anticipated satisfaction. Maya looked up at him with what appeared to be defeated resignation. "Okay," she whispered, "I'll try," and then everything changed. Maya's movement was lightning fast and utterly unexpected. In one fluid motion, she swept her leg in a perfect arc that caught the muscular robber behind his ankles while simultaneously rolling to her left side. The technique was called a scissor takedown, modified for her current physical limitations but executed with the precision of someone who'd practiced it thousands of times. The robber's legs went out from under him instantly. His body pitched backward, arms windmilling as he tried to regain balance that was already gone. The weapon in his hand discharged harmlessly into the ceiling as he fell, the sharp crack of gunfire echoing through the bank like thunder. Plaster dust rained down from above as his back hit the floor with enough force to drive the air from his lungs. Maya was already moving before he'd fully landed. Her pregnancy made certain movements impossible, but it hadn't eliminated her speed or her tactical thinking. She rolled onto her knees and lunged forward, her hands closing around the robber's wrist with a grip that combined desperation with professional training. Her fingers found the pressure points she'd been taught to target, applying force that made his hand spasm involuntarily. The weapon clattered across the marble floor, spinning away from both of them. Maya immediately shifted her weight, using her momentum to drive her elbow into the robber's solar plexus. The blow wasn't as powerful as it would have been before pregnancy, but it was precisely targeted and delivered with enough force to leave him gasping and disoriented. The entire sequence had taken less than 5 seconds, but it transformed the bank from a controlled robbery into chaos. The other 2 robbers spun toward the commotion, their carefully planned operation suddenly derailed by something they'd never anticipated. Their pregnant victim had just neutralized their partner with movements that spoke of professional training and combat experience. "What the hell?" the tall robber shouted, his own weapon swinging toward Maya as she struggled to get back to her feet. Her center of gravity made quick movements awkward, but her training had taught her to adapt to changing circumstances. She used the fallen robber's body as partial cover while reaching for his dropped weapon. The robber near the entrance was already moving, abandoning his post to help his partner, but Maya's actions had created a tactical situation that none of them had prepared for. Instead of controlling a room full of helpless civilians, they now faced an armed opponent who clearly knew how to use weapons and had already demonstrated her willingness to fight. Maya's fingers closed around the grip of the fallen weapon just as the tall robber fired his first shot. The bullet sparked off the marble floor inches from her position, sending chips of stone flying. She rolled again, using her pregnancy to her advantage by presenting a smaller target profile while maintaining her grip on the weapon. The muscular robber was trying to get back to his feet, one hand pressed to his chest where Maya's elbow had connected. His face showed a mixture of pain and disbelief that the pregnant woman he'd been tormenting had just put him on the ground. He was reaching for a backup weapon when Maya's voice cut through the chaos. "Don't move," she commanded, her tone completely different from the frightened submission she'd displayed moments earlier. Now her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed in life-or-death situations. "Keep your hands where I can see them." The transformation was so complete that for a moment everyone in the bank simply stared. The frightened pregnant woman had vanished, replaced by someone who moved with purpose and spoke with command presence. Even her posture had changed, despite the physical limitations of her condition. The robber near the entrance made the mistake of assuming Maya's pregnancy made her an easy target despite what he'd just witnessed. He raised his weapon toward her, but Maya was already moving. She rolled to her right, came up on one knee, and fired 3 rapid shots that demonstrated training far beyond civilian familiarity with firearms. The first shot hit him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his weapon flying. The second caught him in the thigh, dropping him to the floor. The third shattered the glass door behind him, ensuring that even if he tried to crawl toward the exit, he wouldn't be able to escape easily. Maya's accuracy was phenomenal, especially considering she was shooting from an awkward position while 8 months pregnant. Each shot had been precisely placed to disable rather than kill, demonstrating both her skill and her restraint. She wasn't shooting to execute. She was shooting to neutralize threats while preserving life whenever possible. The tall robber had taken cover behind a customer service desk, his carefully planned robbery disintegrating around him. His 2 partners were down, one gasping on the floor near Maya and the other bleeding near the entrance. The pregnant woman he'd dismissed as completely harmless had just demonstrated combat skills that belonged in military operations rather than civilian bank lobbies. "This is impossible," he muttered, trying to process what he was witnessing. Professional criminals developed instincts about potential threats, and nothing about Maya had triggered any warning signals. She'd appeared to be exactly what she seemed, a vulnerable pregnant woman conducting routine banking business. Maya was using the teller counter for support as she maintained her position, the weapon held in a professional 2-handed grip, despite the awkwardness of her condition. Her breathing remained controlled, her eyes constantly scanning for additional threats. The other bank customers were pressed against the floor in terrified silence, but Maya's focus was entirely on the remaining active threat. "Put your weapon down and come out with your hands visible," Maya called out, her voice carrying across the bank with clear authority. "Nobody else has to get hurt today." The tall robber's mind was racing through his limited options. His partners were down, his carefully planned escape route was compromised, and he was facing someone who just demonstrated superior tactical skills. But he was also desperate, and desperate people made unpredictable choices. "You think you're some kind of hero?" he shouted back, his voice cracking with stress and disbelief. "You're just a pregnant lady who got lucky." Maya almost smiled at the comment. Lucky had nothing to do with it. What he'd witnessed was the result of years of training, thousands of hours of practice, and muscle memory that persisted despite months of civilian life. Pregnancy had changed her body but hadn't erased the skills that had once made her one of the most effective military police officers in her unit. She could hear sirens in the distance, growing louder as emergency responders approached the bank. Someone had triggered an alarm or called for help during the chaos. Maya knew she needed to resolve the situation before police arrived, and potentially misidentified her as one of the criminals. "I'm not trying to be a hero," Maya called back truthfully. "I'm just trying to protect my daughter and get everyone home safely today." The muscular robber near her position was slowly regaining his breath, his eyes fixed on Maya with a mixture of hatred and fear. She could see him calculating whether he could reach a backup weapon or make a grab for her, but her positioning and alertness made any aggressive move a clearly suicidal choice. "Stay down," Maya told him quietly, her voice calm but carrying unmistakable menace. "I've already been more generous than you deserved." Dorothy was still behind her teller window, pressed against the back wall with her hands covering her mouth. Her eyes were wide with shock as she watched the pregnant woman she'd been chatting with about baby names systematically neutralize armed robbers with the precision of a trained professional. The other customers remained frozen in place, unsure whether to feel relieved or terrified by this unexpected turn of events. The elderly man looked particularly shaken, his face pale and his breathing rapid. Maya made a mental note to ensure he received medical attention once the situation was resolved. The tall robber was running out of options and time. The sirens were getting closer, and his wounded partners were in no condition to help him escape. He could surrender and hope for mercy, or he could try to fight his way out against someone who'd already proven superior tactical skills. Maya could sense his desperation building, which made him more dangerous rather than less. Desperate people took risks that rational criminals avoided, and she needed to be prepared for increasingly erratic behavior. Her training had taught her that the final moments of any confrontation were often the most perilous. "Think about this carefully," Maya called out, her tone professional and non-threatening. "Your partners are wounded but alive. You can walk away from this if you make the right choice. But if you keep fighting, you're going to force me to hurt you too." The offer was genuine. Maya had no desire to inflict unnecessary harm, but she was absolutely committed to protecting everyone in the bank. If the remaining robber chose to continue fighting, she would respond with whatever force was necessary to neutralize the threat. The tall robber's response came in the form of blind gunfire over the customer service desk. 3 rapid shots that weren't aimed at anything specific, just desperate attempts to create chaos and confusion. The bullets went wide, embedding themselves in the far wall without threatening anyone directly. Maya immediately recognized the pattern. He was trying to create covering fire for a move toward the exit, hoping to escape during the confusion. She adjusted her position accordingly, maintaining her angle of fire while preparing for his likely route of movement. When he broke cover, Maya was ready. The tall robber came around the desk in a crouch, his weapon sweeping toward her position. But Maya had anticipated his movement and was already tracking him. Her first shot took him in the gun hand, sending his weapon spinning away. Her second shot hit his leg, dropping him to one knee. The engagement was over in less than 2 seconds. Maya maintained her firing position for several more moments, scanning for additional threats and ensuring all 3 robbers were truly neutralized. Only when she was certain the immediate danger had passed did she allow herself to relax slightly. The bank had fallen into stunned silence except for the moaning of the wounded robbers and the approaching wail of sirens. Maya slowly pushed herself to her feet, using the teller counter for support as her pregnancy reasserted its physical demands. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the confrontation was beginning to fade, leaving her aware of just how much strain she'd put on her body. "Is everyone all right?" Maya called out, her voice returning to something closer to its normal tone. She was no longer the frightened victim or the tactical operator, just a pregnant woman who'd done what was necessary to protect people. Dorothy emerged from behind her window, her face showing amazement mixed with residual fear. "Maya, where did you learn to do that?" Maya managed a tired smile as she safetied the weapon and placed it carefully on the counter. "Military police. Long time ago. Different life." The elderly man was struggling to sit up, his face still pale but his breathing becoming more regular. The young couple remained huddled together, their eyes fixed on Maya with the kind of awe usually reserved for witnessing something impossible. "Military police," Dorothy repeated, as if trying to reconcile the pleasant pregnant woman she'd been helping with bank paperwork with the tactical operator who'd just neutralized 3 armed robbers. "You never mentioned." "It doesn't usually come up in banking conversations," Maya replied, one hand moving instinctively to her belly to check on Isabella. The baby was moving normally, apparently unaffected by the stress and physical activity of the past few minutes. The muscular robber was staring at Maya with undisguised hatred, but also with something that might have been respect. He'd underestimated her completely, dismissed her as helpless prey, and paid the price for his assumptions. His shoulder was bleeding, but not severely, and his breathing was returning to normal. "You could have killed us," he said, his voice hoarse with pain and surprise. "I could have," Maya agreed calmly. "I chose not to. Don't make me regret that choice." The sirens had reached the bank now, and Maya could see police cars pulling up outside. Officers would be approaching the building with no knowledge of what they'd find inside, potentially seeing her as another threat rather than someone who'd resolved the situation. Maya carefully placed her hands on the counter where they would be clearly visible and called out loudly enough for anyone entering to hear. "Situation is secure. 3 suspects down and disarmed. Civilian with police training and control." The first officers through the door moved with the tactical awareness of professionals responding to an active shooter situation. Their weapons were drawn and ready as they quickly scanned the interior of the bank. Maya remained motionless with her hands visible, allowing them to assess the scene without any additional complications. "Ma'am, step away from the weapon," the lead officer commanded, his gun trained on Maya despite her obvious pregnancy and non-threatening posture. Maya complied immediately, moving slowly away from the counter with her hands raised. "I'm the one who called out. I'm a former military police officer." The three suspects are neutralized and disarmed. The officers quickly secured the scene, verifying that the three robbers were indeed incapacitated and collecting the various weapons scattered around the bank floor. Maya submitted to being handcuffed temporarily while they sorted out who was who, understanding that from their perspective she was just another unknown factor in a volatile situation. Detective Linda Morrison arrived 15 minutes later, a 20-year veteran of the Riverside Police Department who'd seen enough crime scenes to recognize when something didn't fit the usual patterns. The preliminary reports she'd received on the drive over described a bank robbery interrupted by civilian intervention, but the details didn't make sense. "So let me understand this," Morrison said, reviewing her notes while studying Maya, who was now sitting in the back of an ambulance being checked for injuries. "Three armed robbers enter the bank, take hostages, and then what exactly?" Maya had been through enough debriefings to know how to present information clearly and concisely. "They underestimated my capabilities based on my appearance. When one of them got close enough, I disarmed him and used his weapon to neutralize the other two threats." Morrison looked at the crime scene, then back at Maya. "Ma'am, I've been investigating violent crimes for 2 decades. What you're describing isn't something civilians typically accomplish, especially not." She gestured toward Maya's obvious pregnancy. "I'm not a typical civilian," Maya replied calmly. Staff Sergeant Maya Chen, former military police, specialized in crisis response and tactical operations. The detective's expression shifted as the pieces began falling into place. "Military police. That explains the weapon handling and target placement. But ma'am, you're 8 months pregnant. How did you manage the physical demands?" Maya's hand moved to her belly as Isabella kicked, reminding her that she'd been protecting 2 lives during the confrontation. "Training adapts to circumstances. Pregnancy changes your capabilities but doesn't eliminate them if you know how to compensate." Detective Morrison was already on her radio, calling for Maya's military records to verify her story. The physical evidence supported her account, but the detective had learned never to take anything at face value. Within 20 minutes, she had confirmation that Maya Chen had indeed served with distinction as a military police officer, with multiple commendations for performance under fire. The 3 robbers were being treated for their injuries while under police custody. None of the wounds were life-threatening, testament to Maya's precision and restraint. The muscular robber who'd initially tormented her was complaining loudly about police brutality, apparently unaware that his injuries had been inflicted by the pregnant woman he'd been mocking. "Ma'am," Detective Morrison said, returning to Maya's side, "I verified your military service. Based on the evidence and witness statements, it's clear you acted in defense of yourself and others. But I have to ask, was all this force really necessary?" Maya considered the question carefully. "Detective, they had already demonstrated willingness to use weapons and had threatened to take me as a hostage. Given that I'm responsible for protecting my unborn child as well as myself, I chose to neutralize the threats rather than gamble on their restraint." Morrison nodded, understanding the calculus involved. "The district attorney will review everything, but I don't anticipate any charges against you. If anything, you prevented what could have been a much worse situation." Dorothy approached them, having given her own statement to another officer. Her face still showed amazement at the morning's events. "Maya, I just wanted to thank you. If you hadn't acted when you did—" "You don't need to thank me," Maya replied. "I just did what needed to be done." But Dorothy wasn't finished. "No, you don't understand. My grandson was supposed to come in with me this morning. He usually helps me with banking because my arthritis makes it hard to write. If he'd been here..." The implication hung in the air. Maya's actions hadn't just protected the people who were present. They'd potentially prevented a much larger tragedy if the robbers had been allowed to take hostages, or if the situation had escalated when police arrived. The paramedic checking Maya's vital signs looked up from his equipment. "Ma'am, Your blood pressure is elevated and your heart rate is still above normal. I'd recommend a trip to the hospital just to make sure you and the baby are okay after all that stress." Maya was about to decline when she felt Isabella kick particularly hard, as if agreeing with the medical recommendation. "Actually, that's probably a good idea. This morning has been more excitement than either of us bargained for." As the ambulance prepared to transport Maya to Riverside General Hospital, Detective Morrison handed her a business card. "Ma'am, the media is going to be all over this story. You might want to consider how you want to handle that attention." Maya looked at the card, already dreading the coming circus. "Detective, I just want to finish setting up my new life here. I didn't ask to become a news story." "No, but you became one anyway. The security footage shows everything." By tonight, video of a pregnant woman taking down 3 armed robbers is going to be on every news channel in the country. The reality of that statement settled over Maya like a weight. She'd spent months carefully building a quiet, anonymous life in Riverside. Now, through no choice of her own, she was about to become the most famous resident in town. As the ambulance pulled away from the bank, Maya could already see news vans arriving. Reporters were setting up cameras and interviewing witnesses, building the story that would soon transform her from a private citizen into a public figure. The quiet life she'd planned for herself and Isabella was about to change dramatically. But as she watched the bank recede through the ambulance's rear window, Maya felt something unexpected. Not regret for her actions, but a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced since leaving the military. She'd saved lives today, protected innocent people, and demonstrated that heroism wasn't about appearance or circumstances, but about choices made under pressure. Isabella kicked again, and Maya smiled despite her concerns about the coming media attention. Whatever happened next, her daughter would grow up knowing that her mother was someone who stood up when it mattered, who protected others when they needed protection, who didn't let assumptions about weakness prevent her from doing what was right. The morning had started with routine banking business and ended with Maya becoming an unlikely hero. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the story spread and the media descended on Riverside. But for now, she was content to let the paramedics monitor her condition while she processed the extraordinary events of an ordinary Thursday morning. Detective Morrison watched the ambulance disappear around a corner, then turned back to the bank where forensics teams were documenting every detail of the crime scene. In 20 years of police work, she'd never investigated anything quite like this. Most civilian intervention in violent crimes ended badly. But Maya Chen had handled the situation with the precision of a trained professional. The detective's radio crackled with updates from other units. The 3 robbers had been identified as career criminals with extensive records of violent crime. Their plan had been sophisticated, their equipment professional grade, and their escape route carefully planned. Under normal circumstances, they would have succeeded in their robbery and vanished before police could respond effectively. Instead, they'd encountered someone who looked like their ideal victim, but turned out to be their worst nightmare. Detective Morrison shook her head as she reviewed the preliminary forensics report. 6 shots fired, 3 suspects neutralized, no civilian casualties, and precision that would have impressed tactical instructors. As she walked through the bank, Morrison tried to imagine how the scene had unfolded. The robbers entering with confidence, the customers dropping to the floor in fear, Maya appearing to comply while actually preparing to act. The muscular robber leaning over her, completely oblivious to the danger he was creating for himself. Then, the explosion of violence that had turned the tables in seconds. Maya's movements had been captured on the bank's security cameras, and Morrison knew the footage would be analyzed by law enforcement agencies across the country. It was a textbook example of how proper training could overcome seemingly impossible odds. But what impressed Morrison most wasn't the tactical skill Maya had demonstrated. It was the restraint. 3 precision shots to disable the robber near the entrance. Careful target selection that avoided vital organs while ensuring the threats were neutralized. The choice to preserve life even while defending it. Morrison had seen plenty of cases where armed citizens intervened in crimes, and most ended with either the citizen or the criminal dead. Maya had managed to stop 3 armed robbers without killing anyone, despite being 8 months pregnant and facing overwhelming odds. It was the kind of outcome that law enforcement professionals dreamed about but rarely witnessed. The detective's phone buzzed with a text from her captain requesting an immediate briefing. The story was already gaining traction on social media, and the department needed to prepare for the media attention that was about to descend on their small town. By tomorrow, Riverside would be famous for something other than its quiet streets and friendly community. As Morrison headed back to the station, she couldn't help but wonder what kind of person Maya Chen really was. Military police explained the tactical skills, but not the split-second decision-making under pressure or the moral courage to act when others froze. Those were qualities that went deeper than training, rooted in character and conviction that couldn't be taught. In a few hours, Maya would be discharged from the hospital and have to face the reality of her new status as a national news story. Morrison hoped the pregnant woman who'd shown such remarkable strength in crisis would be able to handle the different but equally challenging pressures of unwanted fame. The hospital room at Riverside General was painted in that particular shade of institutional beige that was supposed to be calming, but somehow managed to feel sterile instead. Maya sat on the edge of the examination bed while Dr. Sarah Kim reviewed her test results, occasionally glancing at the silent television mounted in the corner where news coverage of the morning's events played on repeat. Isabella was doing well according to all the monitoring equipment. Her heart beat strong and steady despite the stress her mother had endured. Maya's own vital signs were returning to normal, though the adrenaline crash was leaving her feeling more exhausted than she'd expected. The baby kicked occasionally, as if reassuring Maya that they'd both survived the morning's unexpected challenges. "Everything looks good," Dr. Kim said, setting down her clipboard with a satisfied expression. "Your blood pressure is normalizing, and the baby shows no signs of distress." The stress monitoring indicates she actually remained quite calm throughout whatever happened this morning. Maya smiled at that news, one hand moving instinctively to her belly. She's tougher than she looks, I guess. Just like her mother, apparently. Dr. Kim's tone carried the careful neutrality of a medical professional, but her eyes showed curiosity about the patient who'd become the center of a major news story. "The police detective who brought you in mentioned you were involved in some kind of incident at the bank." Through the room's window, Maya could see news vans lining the hospital parking lot. Reporters and camera crews had discovered her location and were apparently prepared to wait as long as necessary for a statement or interview. The attention made her deeply uncomfortable, but she understood it was probably unavoidable at this point. "Something like that," Maya replied, not particularly eager to relive the morning's events for the 100th time. She'd already given detailed statements to Detective Morrison and federal agents who'd arrived to investigate the attempted bank robbery. The story would become public record anyway, but that didn't mean she had to elaborate on it voluntarily. Dr. Kim finished her examination and made final notes in Maya's chart. "Well, medically speaking, you and the baby are both fine. I'd recommend taking it easy for the rest of the day, but there's no reason you can't resume normal activities tomorrow." Normal activities! Maya almost laughed at the phrase. Her normal activities had included routine banking and apartment hunting, simple tasks that belonged to a quiet life she'd been trying to build. Now, her normal activities would apparently include dodging reporters and dealing with whatever consequences came from becoming an unwilling public figure. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Detective Morrison entered with a manila folder under her arm and an expression that suggested the investigation had revealed interesting developments. Behind her came a woman in a crisp business suit who Maya didn't recognize, but who carried herself with the authority of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. "Maya, I hope you're feeling better," Detective Morrison said, her tone professional but warmer than during their earlier interactions. "This is Agent Sarah Crawford from the FBI. She wanted to speak with you about this morning's events." Agent Crawford stepped forward with the kind of measured confidence that came from years of federal law enforcement experience. Her handshake was firm but brief, and her eyes showed the analytical sharpness of someone who made a living reading people and situations. "Miss Chen, thank you for taking the time to speak with me. I know this has been a difficult day, and I appreciate your cooperation with the investigation." Maya shifted slightly on the hospital bed, automatically adjusting her position to accommodate Isabella's movement. "Agent Crawford, I've already given detailed statements about what happened. I'm not sure what else I can add to the investigation. Actually, I'm less interested in what happened than in who made it happen." Crawford consulted a tablet, swiping through what appeared to be an extensive file. "Your military records make for fascinating reading, Ms. Chen. 3 tours of duty, multiple commendations, specialized training in crisis response and tactical operations. Maya felt a familiar wariness settling over her. Federal agents didn't usually review military records without specific reasons, and those reasons rarely benefited the people whose files they were examining. My service record is a matter of public documentation. I'm not sure why the FBI would find it particularly relevant to a bank robbery investigation. Crawford smiled, but it was the kind of expression that suggested she was leading to something specific rather than engaging in casual conversation. Because the three men you neutralized this morning weren't ordinary bank robbers. They're part of a larger criminal organization that's been under federal investigation for the past 18 months. The revelation shifted Maya's understanding of the morning's events in ways she hadn't anticipated. What she'd perceived as a random criminal act was apparently connected to something much more complex and potentially dangerous. The implications of that connection were troubling, especially considering her current vulnerability. What kind of organization? Maya asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Arms trafficking, primarily. But they've branched out into other activities to fund their operations. Bank robberies, kidnapping, extortion. The three men you encountered today were responsible for at least 6 other violent crimes across 4 states. Detective Morrison added her own perspective to the briefing. Miss Chen, these weren't desperate amateurs looking for quick cash. They were professional criminals with extensive resources and connections. What you did today probably saved a lot of lives beyond just the people in that bank. Maya processed this information while watching Isabella's movements on the ultrasound monitor beside her bed. The baby seemed blissfully unaware that her mother had just learned she'd interfered with a federal criminal investigation simply by defending herself and other innocent people. Agent Crawford continued her briefing, her tone becoming more serious. The problem is that these organizations don't typically accept losses gracefully. When 3 of their operatives are taken down by a single individual, especially in such a public manner, it tends to attract unwanted attention to their activities. Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. Are you saying I'm in danger because I defended myself and other people? I'm saying that your actions this morning were heroic and completely justified, but they may have unintended consequences. We're taking steps to monitor the situation, but I wanted you to be aware of the potential complications. The weight of this revelation settled over Maya like a physical burden. She'd acted instinctively to protect innocent people, using skills she'd hoped never to need again in civilian life. Now those same actions might have put her and Isabella in danger from criminals she'd never known existed. Dr. Kim, who had been listening to the conversation with growing concern, stepped forward. Agent Crawford, are you telling my patient that she needs protection? Because if so, I need to factor that into my discharge recommendations. Crawford's expression softened slightly as she recognized the medical professional's protective instincts. Dr. Kim, we're taking precautionary measures to ensure Ms. Chen's safety. Nothing specific has been threatened, but we believe in being proactive rather than reactive in these situations. Maya's mind was already working through the tactical implications of the FBI's warning. If she was potentially targeted by a criminal organization, her current living situation would be completely inadequate for security purposes. The converted shipping container on Tommy Rodriguez's property offered privacy but virtually no protection against determined adversaries. What kind of precautionary measures? Maya asked, though her military experience had already given her a fairly clear idea of what federal protection protocols typically involved. We'd like to arrange temporary housing in a more secure location while we work on dismantling the rest of this organization. Somewhere with better perimeter security and closer proximity to law enforcement resources. Quote, Maya's first instinct was to decline the offer. She'd spent months carefully constructing a life of independence and self-reliance, and the idea of accepting federal protection felt like a step backward toward the kind of institutional dependence she'd worked to escape. But Isabella's welfare had to take priority over her personal preferences. For how long? Maya asked, already calculating the disruption this would cause to her carefully laid plans for settling in Riverside. Hopefully just a few weeks. We have significant intelligence on this organization's activities, and we expect to make arrests that will eliminate any potential threat to your safety. Detective Morrison had been listening to the exchange with growing understanding of how dramatically Maya's life was about to change. Miss Chen, I know this isn't what you had planned when you moved to Riverside, but the federal resources are probably your best option for ensuring your safety and your daughter's." Maya looked at the television screen where footage of the morning's events was still playing on a continuous loop. The security camera footage showed her transformation from apparent victim to tactical operator with startling clarity. Every major news network was running the story, and social media was buzzing with commentary about the pregnant woman who'd taken down 3 armed robbers. "This is going to follow me for the rest of my life, isn't it?" Maya said, more to herself than to the others in the room. Agent Crawford's expression showed genuine sympathy for Maya's situation. "Miss Chen, I won't lie to you. This story has captured public attention in a way that's unusual for routine criminal cases. The combination of your pregnancy, your military background, and the dramatic nature of your actions has created a perfect storm of media interest." Dr. Kim finished updating Maya's medical chart and approached the bed with discharge papers. "Medically, you're cleared to leave whenever you're ready. But given what I'm hearing about security concerns, I'd recommend accepting whatever protection is being offered." Maya signed the discharge papers while contemplating her limited options. She could attempt to maintain her independence and hope the FBI's concerns were overly cautious, or she could accept their protection and acknowledge that her quiet life in Riverside was over before it had truly begun. Isabella kicked particularly hard, and Maya took it as a sign. "Agent Crawford, what kind of temporary housing are we talking about?" "A safe house about 30 minutes from here. Single-family home, fully furnished, 24-hour security presence. You'd have complete privacy within the secured perimeter, but law enforcement personnel would be nearby at all times." The arrangement sounded like minimum security prison with better furniture, but Maya understood the necessity. Her actions had saved lives, but had also apparently made her a target for people with resources and motivation to cause serious harm. "And after you arrest the rest of this organization, what happens then?" Crawford's pause before answering told Maya everything she needed to know. "We'll assess the ongoing threat level at that time and make recommendations accordingly." Which meant there were no guarantees that her life would ever return to the kind of anonymity she'd been seeking. Maya Chen was no longer just a divorced pregnant woman starting over in a small town. She was now a public figure whose actions had disrupted federal criminal investigations and earned the attention of dangerous people. A soft knock interrupted the conversation, and a nurse entered with a wheelchair for Maya's transport to the exit. Hospital policy required all patients to be wheeled out, regardless of their ability to walk. But Maya suspected the wheelchair also served to shield her from photographers who might be stationed in the corridors. "Miss Chen," Agent Crawford said as Maya transferred from the bed to the wheelchair, "I know this isn't the life you'd planned, but what you did today was extraordinary. You saved lives and helped us disrupt a criminal organization that was causing serious harm to innocent people." Maya's hand moved to her belly as Isabella shifted position. "Agent Crawford, I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just protected my daughter and the people around me. Any mother would have done the same thing." But even as she said it, Maya knew it wasn't entirely true. Most people, regardless of their parental instincts, wouldn't have had the training or capability to neutralize 3 armed criminals. Her military background had given her skills that most civilians simply didn't possess, and those skills had made the difference between tragedy and survival. The wheelchair ride through the hospital corridors felt surreal. Staff members stopped their conversations to stare as Maya passed, clearly recognizing her from the news coverage that had already made her famous. Some offered supportive smiles. Others simply watched with the fascination reserved for witnessing celebrity in person. The hospital's rear exit had been cleared of media personnel, but Maya could see the crowd of reporters and camera crews gathered at the main entrance. Agent Crawford had arranged for transportation that would avoid the media circus while ensuring Maya's safe transfer to the federal safe house. As they approached the unmarked SUV waiting in the hospital's loading area, Maya caught sight of a familiar figure standing near the service entrance. Tommy Rodriguez, her landlord, was talking quietly with what appeared to be a federal agent. His weathered face showed concern as he spotted Maya being wheeled toward the vehicle. "Maya," Tommy called out, approaching the wheelchair with the careful movements of someone who wasn't sure if he was allowed to get closer. "I wanted to make sure you were okay. I've been worried sick since I saw the news." Maya felt a surge of gratitude for his genuine concern. In a day full of federal agents and criminal organizations, Tommy's simple human kindness was a reminder of the connections she'd begun building in Riverside. "I'm fine, Tommy. Isabella's fine, too. But it looks like we won't be able to stay in the container for a while. The FBI has some security concerns." Tommy's expression darkened as he absorbed the implications. "Those bastards threatened you? After what you did to protect people?" Agent Crawford intervened before Tommy could work himself into further outrage. "Mr. Rodriguez, there haven't been any specific threats. We're just taking precautionary measures while we wrap up our investigation." Tommy wasn't satisfied with the diplomatic answer. "How long are we talking about?" "Maya's got that apartment lease starting next month, and she's got plans for when the baby comes." Maya appreciated Tommy's protective instincts, but she could see Agent Crawford growing impatient with questions that couldn't be answered definitively. "Tommy, I'll stay in touch and let you know what's happening. Right now, I just need to make sure Isabella and I stay safe." The transfer to the SUV was accomplished quickly and efficiently, with federal agents maintaining a secure perimeter while Maya was helped into the back seat. The vehicle's windows were tinted dark enough to prevent photography, and additional security vehicles formed an escort convoy as they departed the hospital. As Riverside disappeared behind them, Maya watched through the rear window while the town that was supposed to be her new home receded into the distance. The quiet life she'd planned, the anonymous fresh start she'd carefully orchestrated, had vanished in the space of a single morning. But alongside the disappointment and uncertainty, Maya felt something else. The same sense of purpose that had sustained her through military service. The knowledge that her actions had protected innocent people and served a greater good. She'd saved lives today, and while that accomplishment had complicated her personal plans, it had also reminded her of who she was beneath the civilian persona she'd been constructing. Isabella kicked again, and Maya smiled despite her concerns about the future. Whatever happened next, her daughter would grow up knowing that her mother was someone who stood up when it mattered, who used her abilities to protect others, who chose courage over safety when innocent lives were at stake. The safe house turned out to be a modest two-story colonial in a residential neighborhood that looked like suburban America's idealized vision of itself. Well-maintained lawns, mature trees, and the kind of quiet streets where children rode bicycles and neighbors knew each other's names. It was exactly the type of community Maya had been seeking for Isabella's childhood, but under circumstances she'd never anticipated. Agent Crawford provided a brief tour of the security arrangements. Motion sensors along the perimeter, surveillance cameras at all entry points, and communication equipment that would allow Maya to contact federal agents instantly if she noticed anything suspicious. The house itself was comfortable and fully furnished, designed to accommodate federal witnesses and protected persons for extended periods. The refrigerator is stocked, and there's a secure phone line for outgoing calls, Crawford explained as they completed the walkthrough. Agent Martinez will be stationed in the house across the street, and patrol units will maintain regular presence in the neighborhood. Maya tested the furniture in the living room, finding it surprisingly comfortable for government-issued furnishings. The house had clearly been designed by people who understood that long-term occupants needed more than basic functionality. There were books, magazines, and entertainment systems that would help pass time during what could be an extended stay. "What about medical care?" Maya asked, calculating that she had less than a month before her due date. "I'll need regular checkups, and when Isabella decides to arrive, I'll need to get to a hospital quickly. Dr. Kim has agreed to continue your prenatal care, and we've made arrangements with Riverside General for your delivery. When the time comes, you'll have a full security escort, but otherwise your medical care should proceed normally." The arrangements were professional and thorough, but Maya couldn't shake the feeling that she'd become a prisoner in a very comfortable cage. Her independence had been compromised by forces beyond her control, and her future now depended on the success of federal law enforcement operations she had no influence over. Evening was approaching as Agent Crawford finished her briefing and prepared to leave Maya alone in the safe house for the first time. The transition from hospital room to federal protection felt surreal, as if Maya had stepped into someone else's life without warning or preparation. "Miss Chen, I know this situation isn't ideal, but I want you to know that your actions today probably prevented a lot of suffering. The organization we're targeting has been responsible for significant harm to innocent people, and your intervention has given us opportunities we wouldn't have had otherwise." Maya nodded, understanding the agent's attempt to provide perspective on her situation. "Agent Crawford, I appreciate everything you're doing to keep us safe. I just hope this gets resolved quickly enough for me to build some kind of normal life for Isabella. We're working around the clock to make that happen. In the meantime, try to rest and take care of yourself. You've been through a lot today." After Crawford left, Maya found herself alone in the safe house for the first time since the morning's events. The silence felt profound after a day filled with interviews, medical examinations, and security briefings. Isabella was moving normally, apparently unaffected by the stress and upheaval that had transformed their lives. Maya made herself dinner from the well-stocked refrigerator, noting that someone had even included her dietary preferences based on information from her medical records. The Federal Protection Program was clearly designed to minimize disruption to protected persons' daily routines, but no amount of thoughtful preparation could compensate for the loss of freedom and choice. As darkness fell outside the safe house windows, Maya sat in the living room watching news coverage of the day's events. Every major network was running extended segments about the pregnant woman who'd neutralized 3 armed bank robbers, complete with expert analysis and commentary from law enforcement professionals. The security footage had been enhanced and slowed down, allowing viewers to see exactly how Maya had executed her takedown of the muscular robber and her subsequent tactical movements. Military experts were being interviewed about the precision of her shooting and the restraint she'd shown in disabling, rather than killing her attackers. Maya found the coverage surreal, watching herself transformed into a news story and public symbol rather than simply a person who'd acted to protect herself and others. The commentators were discussing her motivations, her training, and her character as if they knew her personally, constructing narratives about heroism and maternal instinct that bore little resemblance to her actual experience. Her phone rang, displaying her sister Sarah's number. Maya had been expecting this call since the story broke, knowing that Sarah would be worried sick after seeing the news coverage from Denver. "Maya, are you all right? I've been calling hospitals all day trying to find you, and then the FBI told me you were in protective custody. What the hell happened?" Maya provided a condensed version of the day's events, focusing on her physical condition and Isabella's well-being rather than the tactical details that had captured media attention. Sarah listened with growing amazement and concern, occasionally interrupting with questions that revealed how little the news coverage had explained about the federal investigation aspects. "So you're basically in witness protection now because you defended yourself in a bank robbery?" "It's more complicated than that, but essentially yes. The people I stopped were part of a larger criminal organization, and the FBI is concerned about potential retaliation." Sarah was quiet for several moments, processing the implications of Maya's situation. "Maya, this is insane. You moved to Riverside to start a quiet life, and now you're a national news story hiding in a federal safe house. I know. I keep thinking this has to be happening to someone else, but Isabella keeps kicking to remind me it's really my life that's been turned upside down. How long do they think you'll need protection?" Maya looked around the comfortable but confining safe house, calculating the unknown variables that would determine her future. "They're hoping to wrap up their investigation in a few weeks, but there are no guarantees. It depends on how quickly they can arrest the rest of this organization. Maya, I want to come out there. You shouldn't be going through this alone, especially with the baby coming so soon." The offer was tempting, but Maya understood that involving Sarah would only complicate the security arrangements and potentially put her sister at risk as well. "Sarah, I appreciate it, but the FBI has everything under control. I'll be fine here, and Isabella will be fine. This is just temporary." After ending the call with Sarah, Maya found herself alone again, with the weight of her transformed circumstances. The quiet evening routine she'd been looking forward to establishing in Riverside had been replaced by federal protection protocols and security concerns that would define her immediate future. Isabella kicked persistently, and Maya realized her daughter was probably responding to her elevated stress levels. She tried to relax, focusing on breathing exercises she'd learned during military training for managing pressure and anxiety. The techniques still worked, gradually bringing her heart rate down and easing the tension in her shoulders. The house's security system chimed softly as motion sensors detected Agent Martinez's patrol of the perimeter. Maya found the regular checks reassuring rather than intrusive, confirmation that trained professionals were monitoring her safety while she adjusted to her new reality. As the evening progressed, Maya began exploring the safe house more thoroughly. The bedrooms were comfortable and well-appointed, with one clearly intended as a nursery based on the neutral decor and proximity to the master bedroom. Someone had anticipated that she might need to deliver Isabella while in federal protection, a level of planning that was both thoughtful and sobering. The house's study contained extensive reading material, including books on childcare and parenting that Maya hadn't yet acquired for herself. There were also military histories and tactical manuals that someone had apparently thought might interest her, based on her service record and recent actions. Maya settled into a comfortable chair with a book on infant care, trying to focus on the practical preparations she'd need to make for Isabella's arrival. Reading about feeding schedules and sleep patterns felt reassuringly normal after a day dominated by criminal investigations and security concerns. But even as she tried to concentrate on mundane parenting advice, Maya's mind kept returning to the larger questions about her future. Would she be able to return to Riverside after the federal investigation concluded? Would the media attention eventually fade enough for her to rebuild the quiet life she'd been seeking? Would Isabella grow up in the shadow of her mother's unexpected fame? The baby kicked again, and Maya realized she'd been unconsciously holding her breath while contemplating these uncertainties. She forced herself to exhale slowly and return her attention to the childcare manual, focusing on information she could actually use, rather than worrying about variables beyond her control. Outside the safe house windows, Riverside suburbs settled into their evening routines. Porch lights came on, families gathered for dinner, and children played in backyards while their parents watched from kitchen windows. It was the kind of normal community life Maya had been hoping to join, now visible but temporarily inaccessible due to circumstances she'd never anticipated. Agent Martinez's periodic security checks continued throughout the evening, reassuring Maya that professional protection was maintaining her safety while she processed the day's extraordinary events. The federal agents were clearly competent and dedicated, but their presence was a constant reminder that her life had been fundamentally altered by a single morning's actions. As bedtime approached, Maya realized that tomorrow would bring new challenges as the media attention continued and the federal investigation progressed. Her story was now part of the national conversation about violence, heroism, and the capabilities of ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. But lying in the safe house's comfortable bed, feeling Isabella's movements as her daughter settled into her own sleep cycle, Maya found herself at peace with the choices she'd made. She'd acted to protect innocent people when they needed protection, using skills she'd hoped never to need again but hadn't hesitated to employ when lives were at stake. Whatever happened next, Isabella would grow up knowing that her mother was someone who stood up when it mattered, who used her abilities to serve others, who chose courage over comfort when circumstances demanded action. The quiet life Maya had planned might no longer be possible, but perhaps something better was waiting on the other side of this unexpected chapter. Isabella kicked one final time as if in agreement, and Maya smiled as she drifted off to sleep in her federal safe house bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she was simply a mother preparing for her daughter's arrival, protected by people who understood the value of her actions and committed to ensuring her safety. The morning sun streaming through the safe house windows marked the beginning of a new phase in Maya Chen's life, one defined not by the anonymity she'd sought, but by the recognition that sometimes ordinary people were called to do extraordinary things. And sometimes, just sometimes, the world noticed and responded with gratitude rather than indifference. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.